prayer for Harvey victims. Mr. Trump is praising the response of the areas hardest hit by the storm.
The people of Texas and Louisiana were hit very hard by a historic flood. In their response, they have taught us all a lesson, a very, very powerful lesson. There was no outbreak in crime. There was an outbreak of compassion only, real, beautiful, strong compassion. And they've really inspired us as a nation. To be honest, they've inspired the world because the world is watching.
For the latest on Harvey and its aftermath, let's go to Steve Harrigan in Orange, Texas. Steve.
Jesse, this is a pretty typical scene in Orange, Texas. The house closest to the highway might have 3 or 4 feet of water damage. Further down, you go to the neighbor, 5 or 6 feet. By the time you get to the end of the street, some of those houses are completely underwater. All day long, we've been watching people pull things out from these soaked houses, trying to save what they can. Out on the sidewalk, you'll see soaking wet couches, carpets, even drywall. This brown, stinking water seems to destroy almost everything it touches. This is tough work here to try and clean it up, and emotional work as well. More than 37,000 houses have major structural damage from this hurricane, so the cleanup effort is going to be huge, and a lot of people still don't know how bad it is. We've seen people come to the edge of the water, point down the road and say, see that third telephone pole down there? That's my house. What you see there is nothing but water. So a lot of people have it very bad, but they still don't know how bad yet. They can't get to their houses. There's 10 feet of water in the way. Jesse, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Let's now go to Rick Leventhal in Vidor, Texas. Rick.
Jesse, this town got a year's worth of rain in 4 days, and Main Street remains underwater tonight. The Natchez River, the peak of that river, the flood record was 13 feet. Today it crested at 21. So 8 feet above the previous record. This town could not have seen that coming. And just like much of southeast Texas, it is dealing with some horrific conditions here tonight. There's a curfew in effect. The power's out. The residents were lined up at a nearby store all day trying to get some basics, water, food, that sort of thing. And there are people behind me in neighborhoods that are basically islands at this point. There are some dry stretches of Main Street leading that way, but in between there are these massive areas that have been flooded. So earlier today we went out with some relief workers, some volunteers, and some members of the Harrison Fire Department from northeast Texas, and they had a high water vehicle. They're driving through the floods, towing a boat on a trailer, and they go through the dry areas, through another flooded area, through another dry area, to get to another flooded area. It's the only way these boats could get in there, to then send the boats in to pick up people, their pets, bring them out, put them back on the truck, and then drive them back out again. They evacuated, the police chief tells me, 1,200 to 1,500 people. There are some people who didn't want to leave their homes, now are wishing they did. Some of those people are now being rescued. And the police chief tells me that they're moving from this recovery operation to a law enforcement operation. They have had some looting issues here, and they're dealing with those as they continue to hope that these waters recede a little bit quicker than they are so far, Jesse. Unbelievable,
Rick. Thank you very much. President Trump hasn't left Washington yet, but he's already getting criticism from the left for his trip to see Harvey victims in Texas and Louisiana tomorrow.
We all talked about how insensitive it was for him not to mention the victims in his first trip. Tomorrow should not be to remake or redo what he didn't do the first trip. Tomorrow he ought to say we're making immediate funding available. We're going to put FEMA people on the street to handle debris. He needs to come in with a proactive agenda rather than a makeup for the debacle he did the other day.
So that's the new narrative, Gutfeld, that he blew it on the first trip, and now this is a makeup trip. Is anybody believing that?
Well, you shouldn't believe anything from Sharpton. There are 5 words for him: shut up and go away. This is a guy who has lived his life about himself. One of the most self-serving hustlers of our time. He's the exact opposite of what you see in the streets of Houston and everywhere. It's funny. Traditional leftists like him are in malfunction mode. This is why you're seeing them now blame Trump for this or for that. They're trying to find a narrative that matches their grim worldview because Harvey has destroyed their worldview. There's no more division. There's no more bigotry. There's no more racism, conflict. All you're seeing 24/7 is unity, Americans all the time working together. So they go like, well, what can we do now? Let's go after Trump because that might work. Just another note about what Harvey has done, one of the positive things, offers a contrast to things like Twitter. You know, Twitter encourages antagonism because it's not face-to-face interaction. So I can attack you or you or you because we never actually know each other. You can't find one example in Harvey coverage of negative human interaction. You can't find one because it's face-to-face. It's human. You can't, there's no antagonism. And it shows you the contrast between why people have to talk to each other rather than tweet at each other.
And it also, you know, very quickly, just to tack on to Greg's point, because I think you're absolutely right. And it's the difference between how you view human nature.
Yeah.
So if you view human beings as senseless and needy and incapable of thinking for themselves, and ultimately as bad people who, when they lose everything, then they will attack each other, you are a statist.
Yeah.
However, if you are someone who believes that human nature is ultimately good and people will come together in the face of a crisis, well, then you are a decent person, probably a libertarian, and you see people relying on each other,
right?
relying on each other, relying on their neighbors, accepting the help, but more than that, like reaching out and helping as many people as they possibly can for the sheer sake of helping people.
Right.
Yeah, I guess Joel Osteen then isn't on Twitter, huh?
He's actually, I don't think he is, and I think he's done a really bad job of
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, you say you
messaging his
can't think
bubble.
of one instance. I mean, the whole country's talking about that as an instance, and then you say, you know, self-absorbed person for a second. I thought you were talking about Trump, but no, you were talking about Sharpton.
Yeah, because we were talking about Sharpton. I think Trump gave $1 million. I think Osteen might have been mischaracterized because I don't think anybody ever had all the facts on that story.
No, but I don't think
and
he
Tyler Perry just gave what, $250,000 to Osteen.
Yeah.
So your story went up in smoke.
No, by his own admission, he says, you know, he was directing people to the city. And he didn't have the church.
He could have done a better job.
But I don't think that's the story.
It's not a negative story.
I agree with you that overwhelmingly it's been a positive story. And I think it's so important for the country to hear those kinds of healing messages. But I don't think that it was fair to go after Sharpton when Sharpton says something very concrete.
Self-aggrandizing.
This is not about a makeup trip. This is about helping people.
He helped Tawana Brawley, didn't he?
Oh, you're back to Sharpton.
Yeah,
No,
Freddie's Fashion Mart. Remember that?
I see. Well,
I think I got, what are the Crown Heights riots? People died.
The donations from Trump and where they went to, like that huge oil painting of Trump.
We're talking about Sharpton.
He did donate $1 million of his own money.
We don't know. The White House doesn't know if it was his money or the corporate.
So you can't even let the president donate $1 million to victims. You have to spin it into a negative story. Did it come from the Trump organization? Did it come from his personal bank account?
That's all of a sudden.
The only point of doing that is to make it look like he's cheap, which he's not. And Sharpton is, because Sharpton still owes back taxes to the IRS.
No, but I mean, raise your hand if you're surprised. No, raise your hand if you're surprised that Al Sharpton is again exploiting tragedy to raise his personal profile, which is diminishing. I mean, this is what this is about. He's trying to latch on to a tragedy to regain relevancy here. And my question to you, and for Democrats, what can the president possibly be doing more that he's not been doing over this past week to help the victims of Harvey?
Well, I think that it's clear, and I think that's what Sharpton was saying.
No,
Make it about helping people. And in answer to your question, I think it's so self-evident. I don't want to be overly critical because people have gone over this point. But he lacked
You know
empathy.
what? If he had stayed in Washington, D.C., if he hadn't gone to the flood area, if he hadn't gone to Texas, if he hadn't met with the governor of Texas and relief workers, if he had stayed in D.C., which is what some liberals were begging him to do, just so they could criticize him for that. I mean, in this situation, he does plenty of things where he hurts himself. This is not one of them. And for the people who are looking for drama and trying to exploit political division for their own gain, shame on you.
And let's be honest, anything that President Trump does, he's going to be criticized. That is the way that this president is being covered by the media. Slate and publications like that.
Sometimes he deserves it.
Well, but Slate and publications like that were already criticizing him before the storm even hit. Look, you have both Governor Abbott and Governor Edwards of Texas and Louisiana, one a Republican, one a Democrat, who have praised President Trump and this administration's handling of the storm, in both very quickly approving the disaster declaration, giving them the much-needed government money that they need to help rebuild their states, and also just in the search and rescue process. As well, as we had mentioned, President Trump also is allegedly giving $1 million of his own money. What is Al Sharpton doing to help them? That's what I would like to know. I mean, seriously, what has he done? What is he doing to show any kind of leadership besides exploiting tragedy to try to get his face on TV?
I think that it's interesting to watch you guys. You guys are so back on your heels on this empathy issue because
no, actually,
no, we're not. Any president
that's also a manufactured.
I am on my high heels, and I am
you can go.
empathy.
If you recall,
did you want him to go into people's houses and cry? Did you want him to climb trees and rescue kittens?
No, you know what?
What does empathy do?
Here's the thing, Kennedy. If you tweet epic devastation, I was out there, I went to the front lines, and people know he did not go to the front lines.
If he had gone to the
standing there holding up a Texas flag,
it's not about anybody trying to exploit something. It's simply saying that was a failure in terms of leadership at a critical moment. It doesn't measure up to what other presidents did, 9/11, Charlotte.
But okay.
Go ahead, Greg.
I said this yesterday, but President Trump's role in this is not that important because what you're seeing is a monumental shift in the narrative of this country. We have been immersed in identity politics for so long, and what we're seeing is a waking up. We are coming out of this horrible depression, and I think it's kind of monumental. I don't think Trump plays a huge factor in this. He didn't have to, because what you're seeing, and it's so important in Texas, you are seeing victims not acting like victims after years of people embracing victimology who aren't victims. In this case, you are seeing real victims just getting it done without acting like victims. We're seeing a monumental turnaround.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and people reclaiming their goodness.
Yeah.
And not being told that because they might have political differences, they have to hate each other, and they have to shout at each other, and they have to use fascist tactics in order to shut each other down. There is none of that here, and I think that's why the left is looking for something to manufacture in order to drive a wedge where there doesn't need to be.
The president also hasn't failed here, and that's why we're seeing the desperation of the left, because they're grasping at straws to come up with reasons how President Trump is not handling this well. Case in point, Melania's heels. That's what they're trying to do. They're grasping at straws. He's doing a very good job, and we should be appreciative of that.
The guy's on the ropes, in terms of his inability to convey. And I think that's what we'll see. I know you guys like to shout when people talk, but let me finish this. He's on the ropes in terms of the lack of empathy, the fact that he didn't go to the victims. Instead, he goes to a shelter headquarters.
You created a false narrative, Juan. No one believes he lacks empathy except people on MSNBC.
If he had donated a kidney.
You didn't say that the first day. You heard it on some other show, and then you repeated it the second day.
Jesse,
we got to go.
Jesse, I'm going to finish this point.
Big government liberals are using Harvey to say the government should get even bigger.
Oh, see, this is how Jesse, this is rudeness. And the point I wanted to make to you is it's not me. Go to the Fox poll. It's only like a quarter of Americans who think this president has empathy. Okay. He goes to a FEMA headquarters.
They didn't poll that after Harvey won.
He's self-absorbed, talking about himself versus President Bush's performance in Katrina.
Can we just step
It's absolutely something that we shouldn't talk about.
End of the sentence.
I'd be delighted. That's his failing.
Okay, now let's get to the point where it matters. If you are having emergency surgery, do you want a surgeon who is a jerk, who is the best surgeon, or do you want an average surgeon who has a great bedside manner?
Legitimate point.
You want an excellent surgeon who's a jerk, not a terrible surgeon who's all fuzzy. You don't want that. So the fact is, expecting empathy from Trump, that's not why he was elected. It wasn't why he was